again. Now, my guest is VK Durham, an impatient VK Durham, but I love her to death. And she is explaining to you, she actually has the money. This lady has access to a contract worth enough money to help out everybody in America. If George Bush had given the $2 trillion that he gave to the bankers, if he had given that to, let's say, the people, then every American could have paid off their homes, paid off the Federal Reserve, taken them out of our life, and gone on. What's happening now?
What happened to the $6.5 trillion gold swap, gold conversion payment that I made to pay off the American and Latin American debt, the continental debt? What happened to that? What happened to that $6.5 trillion in gold? What happened to that? Jamie Dimon's what happened to that? George Bush, Bill Clinton. That's what happened to that. They paid, and this was, when I paid that, we paid it through the trust, and when we paid that, it was to pay off and bring back all of the infrastructure that George Bush sold off in Executive Order 12803. But the roads are still in ill repair. The bridges are still falling down. Your highways are full of chuck holes. Your rivers channels haven't been dredged. Your dams are not being repaired. Your educational system has gone to hell in a handbasket. Your health care has really gone to rack and ruin. And all of that was to be paid for by this trust. Now, I want to know what the hell happened to that $6.5 trillion debt payment. And every one of you should be asking, what in the hell happened? I've asked Ron Paul. Ron Paul's asking for an audit of the Federal Reserve. But there's been so much off-ledgering, so much off-ledger bookkeeping, that these bankers have just absolutely run wild. Now, in cutting their own private deals with money that belongs, and assets that don't even belong to them. They have run up probably $108 or $9 quadrillion in derivatives debts, alleging that it's a U.S. debt. No, it's not. They used counterfeit instruments from my husband, alleging that it was from my husband. My husband didn't have any signatory power. He sure as hell didn't have any ownership, because I don't trust men. I made a mistake of trusting Gene Valentine. I thought perhaps he would be as smart in banking as Russell was. He proved to be nothing more but a pain in the ass, and so did Dan Hughes. They both turned traitors, just like many of the others who were dummying up. And incidentally, Dan Hughes has the same capacity as Gene. He's an SEC broker, that they can put out these financial instruments, these dummy up these spreadsheets, and do just exactly what Ray Lynn's husband, Gunther Russmacher, did, that brought down Germania Savings and Loan in St. Louis, Germania Bank. And I didn't know this until just recently, that my son-in-law, ex-son-in-law, was on the board of directors of that bank. Now, this thing is just, these people, somebody has got to get control of these people. They buy the judges, they buy the courts, they buy law enforcement.
That's right. They're buying into and taking over the drug. They're using the drug cartels to go in and take over police departments.
I know. And that's sad. That is very sad.
Now,
we found yesterday, I started to get into that going to Europe. Well, I was having computer problems back in October, so Gene sent me a laptop. And the because I was having computer problems, and I go up and down the stairs all the time to get to my main computers. Sometimes I was up to my ankles in water down there if it rained. And all that electrical equipment all over the damn place. So Gene sent me a computer. And it was a little Dell. And so after the romance ended, well, Gene and I got away from Aspen Manor up there with barely, by the skin of my teeth and with my life. All of a sudden, Gene wants that computer back. Well, yesterday we went to court. And down here at Magistrate's Court, it was C-1265. And Gene has been playing games. He uses these courts like you run a yo-yo up and down a string. And so anyway, this Carl Taylor was there. And Gene's attorney was there, this little Amanda M. Messler, Esquire. But she wasn't representing anybody in the case. She just sat there. So Carl sat there and he said, well, Your Honor, he says, I have where we purchased that computer. And Mr. Valentine sent that to Miss Durham to use as long as they worked together. And he was on the witness stand. And I had the right to cross-examine him. And I said, Mr. Gangler, I said, you have the purchase receipt. He said, that's right. And I said, do you have the receipt where you sent FedEx a computer to VK Durham to 611 Moorhead Street in Ida Grove, Iowa? That Dell computer? In October 2011. No, I don't. I said, neither do I. I said, there's been some contractual interference here. I said, there was a quid pro quo between the Winchells and myself, and I said, there's been a lot of interference here. I said, now, I said, do you have a copy of that agreement between Gene C. Valentine and VK Durham that says she's to use that computer as long as they are working together? No, we don't. No, I don't. And I said, well, neither do I. I said, but Your Honor, I said, a rule of law, an old maxim of law, is he who has control over something is 99 9/10% of the law. And I said, under the legal definition of gifting, I said, the law is pretty clear. And I said, it's not a matter of fact. I said, it is explicit. Now, as a matter of fact, I said, I suspicion that computer has a recall or a tracking device or something that is involved in criminal activity. I said, now when that computer came to me, it was completely programmed. Wasn't it, Carl? Well, yes, Dell programmed it. And I said, well, that's funny that Dell programmed it. I said, because my Skype address, all my Skype messages to Gene Valentine, my email, all of my emails to you and Gene, etc., are in that computer. That was programmed at Dell Factory. I said, I think that's very strange. I said, and then just recently, we have discovered that there's a computer hijacking that has gone on. I said, and we're finding that there's a 661 number that's used, that's a Skype, unknown Skype, that's using our telephones and our Skype system, like the old microwave hops that we bounce from station to and relay on and on. And I said, this is coming out of the U.S. military communications base there in Palmdale, California. And I said, they're using that, which uses Skype, to contact the troops over in Iraq and Iran and all over the world, but they're also using that to launder money. And I said, I suspicion there's a bit of drug laundering going on there, and there's a bit of sex ring laundering going out through that. And I said, all of this has been recently discovered, and I believe this is why you want that computer. But, Your Honor, the rules of gifting is pretty extensive. They're very explicit. Now, I have control of that computer. It was shipped to me. It was a gift to me, and it's mine. And she ruled in my favor. I said, now, Your Honor, I said, pursuant to federal evidence rules 201D, I would like to submit my claim for damages. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear anything about sex. I don't want to hear anything about abuse, elder abuse. I don't want to hear it. Yeah. And she said, I won't accept it. I said, but the federal laws, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure under Title 28, Rules of Evidence, 201D, says I can submit this at any time. I've already ruled. I don't want to know about it. I want to allow it to be admitted. And I said, well, I find that strange because under civil case up here, 12C30, under Judge Rick's case, he ruled that everything criminal, which was supposed to go over to a criminal investigation, criminal prosecution. I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. And I said, well, I do. I said, there's a lot of recalls. There's a lot of interstate conspiracy that's gone on here. And I said, this evidence should be admitted because there's a lot of damages that's been brought on. I don't want to know about it. So she wasn't allowed to be admitted. Well, as we walked out of court, there is Miss Amanda M. Messler, Esquire. Bless her little pointed head. She stands there and she begins to threaten me, which is a criminal act within itself, in front of witnesses, 3 witnesses, 2 deputy sheriffs, and a civilian. And, well, we're going to sue you. We're going to sue you for everything you posted on Rumor Mill. I said, fine, you do that, sugar. I said, one, to have a legitimate litigation, you have to have something that's untrue, not allegations. I said, mine is true, it's backed up by facts. And I said, if you want to sue me, you might as well sue Ray Lynn Allen. She's the owner of Rumor Mill. I was her agent, and she's got her fat ass up here on the hill with Gene Valentine. So you have a nice day.
Grandma, let me, I just had somebody send, and I want to get this in the story today. I'm not sure why this is echoing like this.
Well, you have ears.
Yes, I'm sure I do. I'm sure I do. But I want to share this with you.
Okay.
John Kaminsky will be on my show in a couple of days.
Do what? I can't hear you.
I said Gene I'm sorry. Distracting as hell. Hang on a minute here.
I know.
Let me. I'm gonna disconnect you, and I'm gonna call you right back, Grandma.
Thank you, hon.
All right. The problem with the sound is coming from her. Here. So let me get her back on.
Yeah.
All right, dear. That's better.
Yes, it is.
Yes, you're right. It was on your end, and somebody was there.
No, it's not on mine. I wasn't garbage.
No, they're just tapping your phones, and they've got your Skype number. They certainly got mine. I just had a troll coming on threatening me to get me off of Skype and all this. Called me 5 times between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the
Well, I
morning.
would report it. I'd start reporting this to the Marshal Services. Now, what were you starting to say about Gene Valentine?
No, well, actually, I was going to talk about John Kaminsky. He just sent me an email, and he had a few things at the end of this email. He's talking about how we are to be ruled by 4-year-olds instead of the people in Congress. But he said, you know, at 4 and 14, you know, that's really the time when your mind starts developing and you get your information. And his recommendation is quit school now and form local militias to protect natural farmers from the Jewish food police. He said your teachers are lying to you. The Israeli-controlled U.S. government killed its own people on 9/11 just to make more wars. Everything they've said since has been a lie, and millions of people were murdered because of it. This is your country. Do something about it. Stop obeying federal laws. Read Jefferson's Kentucky resolutions. It's the godless U.S. government versus God and the people. Whose side are you on? Well, whose side would you like to be on, you know?
Just a minute. I want to say something.
All right, dear.
John, if you're listening, and I'm certain you are, because you're like me, you like to keep your ear to the ground on just about everything. The Constitution forbids the United States from eavesdropping on any American citizen. So, to be able to eavesdrop, they contract out to Israel. It is Israel who, in conjunction with the Federal Reserve, eavesdrops on the American people.
Let me just stop you right there to reinforce what you're saying is the absolute truth. It was Converse and MDocs that got the contract to tap all of our telephones, all of our cell phones, and that happened right the month before my accident happened. And my accident happened because somebody tapped my phone. Somebody knew where I was going to be and had somebody there waiting for me. So go ahead, Grandma, finish.
I had called Congressman Vicki Weaver's office to talk to Mike Williams, who was he was formerly with Link Odom at the Attorney General's office there in Chicago. And Mike Williams was scared to death to talk to me about Russell and Russell being murdered, because as was every congressman's office, and this was in 94, 95, because everything they said was being monitored. Every congressional office is monitored. Every senator's office is monitored. They are being blackmailed and threatened, intimidated, coerced by those who are tapped in to their offices, to their telephones, to their emails, cell phones, even into their homes. This is what's happened in this country.
Grandma, the article that I did that's in my book, Mystery Babylon, about Operation Watchtower, there was a second operation that happened that's included in the book, in the documentation on Operation Watchtower, and it was the cover-up. It was called Operation George Orwell, and they used the Green Berets under Colonel Catolo to go in and tap the phones of the senators, to tap the phones of the Kennedys, to tap the phones of the priest that might have knowledge of the cocaine smuggling coming out of through Panama. that was Operation George Orwell, and all of the details are contained in my book. So again, what you're saying is absolutely true. The story broke in New York Times about the NSA tapping everybody's phones, and the two Israeli companies are tapping this. We're falling back on, we're going back. The story goes back to this Israeli controlled, and I can't tell you whether Israel and whether Israel controls the United States controls Israel, or if all of them are controlled by the banksters.
Here's what it is. The real law of this country, the law of the land, states that the United States is not supposed to contribute to belligerents. Well, Israel's one of the most belligerent countries on the face of this earth. And we support her with our tax dollars. And why do we do that? Because about 90% of your Congress and your Senate, your U.S. House of Representatives, are Jewish. They're either Jewish or the phones that have been tapped are blackmailing them in to favor the illegal propensities of Israel, which is why Israel calls the United States Big Israel. Now, I don't know. I haven't authorized any use of my collateral. And I'm going to say this. I don't know, and if I had my way about it, Israel would get her ass spanked. Literally.
Should have done that when they blew up tried to sink the USS Liberty.
Just a minute. I'm going to finish.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm saying, anytime someone goes in and deliberately does what Israel has done to Palestine and Bethlehem, and killing people just because they're Israel, a nation who has 5 times violated the covenant with God, a nation that Revelation chapter 3 verses 9, 10, and 11 speaks of very distinctly and very explicitly, who can blackmail and hoodwink and control other nations through a fiat money system as they walk in the front door with bogus money and out the back door with the gold and assets of the nation. I take serious umbrage with that. Now, you asked me what was going to happen about Gene Valentine. Well, Gene Valentine, I believe, by the time Interpol gets through with him, and by the time the rest of the, I'm going to just come out and say it. By the time the real Masons get through with him for pretending to be a Mason, by the time the Navy League, are you listening to who I'm talking about?
Yes.
By the time the Navy League, now guys, a lot of you are Navy League and you know what that means, just as I do. By the time the Navy League finishes with that imposter, by the time the Department of Justice finishes with that imposter, by the time the old boys at Gladios, who have had their balls cut off because they believed in the Gene Valentines and their financial instruments, which were not worth the paper that was written on. And by the time the real Treasury, the real Department of the Treasury, not the Treasury that Bill Clinton let the Federal Reserve into by executive order in 1994-95 so that they could overthrow the world. And I'm talking about the real treasury, the constitutional treasury, the treasury trust of we the people. By the time they find out what in the hell is going on here, they're going to deball a bunch of these tomcats. And I'm going to tell you, they're going to do it. They will do it. Now, as far as Gene Valentine is concerned, I'm going to say it up front. I don't have any truck with men that have situations with other men. That's all there is to it. I don't care if he goes for women, too. I've always been a one-man all my life. My husband would have cut his balls off and fed them to him. He was that much of a man. But now, as far as Gene having access to the trust, Gene has access to nothing, except he has caused a lot of embarrassment for my adopted family out in Iowa. He's put them in danger, and I object to that. I seriously object to that. Now, Gene thought he knew everything. He don't know bullshit. This trust is protected. This Gene Valentine, Jamie Dimon, Timmy Gaitner's, Ben Bernanke's, all of that bunch of crud, they can't touch this trust. And if anything, what happens to the trust, if anything happens to me, there's only one other individual that's got control over it.
Don't even give that name out.
I wouldn't think of it.
All right, dear. You know, if we had, maybe we have to start in, you know, one county or one state, and maybe we start. There are people out there that are looking for funding, like Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and you know, he's being demonized and attacked by the liberal press and everything else.
They always demonize the one that's telling the truth.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm a pain in the ass, but according to Mr. Diamond and Mr. Valentine and Mr. B.B. Hughes, I'm a real pain in the horse's ass because I won't let them steal. I hold their feet to the fire, and that's what's happened to Sheriff Joe. That's what's happened to anyone who tries to keep law and order. That's what happens when you try to uphold, protect, and defend the laws of the United States of America.
That's right. They came after me for supposedly starting a militia and all that. And I said, what part of the Second Amendment don't you understand? We started it. Yeah, I started the militias. You're damn right I did. And I did it with the full knowledge in the presence of Governor Gary Johnson. Sure did. They just don't tell you that. They don't tell you that part.
Clay, they're damn lucky that I'm not back in my younger years. They are damn lucky because, man, I would have gone hunting. And I had a license to hunt.
Let me ask you something. If we got a state, if we went to a governor of a state, now Arizona is under attack and under assault. Both Texas is there's a big there's a big patriot movement in Texas. Texas International.
Right there. Why won't it work? Because you have people like Seawitch or Marty Fromm, who was up there in Alaska, who was allegedly representing the trust, but she turned around and tried to time because of Gene Valentine.
All right, hold on a minute here. We got a couple of things here I got to do here. We got
people who are connected with Truth Radio. It is honest money, monetary policy, banking, international banking, and our interest in that subject goes back.
All right, we're just about out of time here. Hold on just a second here. And what are we doing here?
Well, because of Gene Valentine.
It's where are we over there? You got a talk show?
Yeah, we're back.